Happy Friday, Hokie Nation. Welcome back to another video edition of the Friday Q&A. As always, Tech Sideline is brought to you by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. First Bank and Trust Company offers a variety of checking and saving account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, including free checking. Visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Well, we're back here inside the Tech Sideline studios. I'm Robert Bateman, joined alongside by Crist Coleman on set. And behind the scenes, pushing the buttons, it's Nick Brown. You ready to get into things?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, before we get into our first question, make sure to drop any future questions you have for the TSL Q&A down below in the comment section. But our first question this week comes from Jorner Kenner Connect, which wants to know, with the entire D-line headed to the NFL, is there anyone on the D-line that you are going to keep your eye on?
A whole bunch of guys. You know, when you lose a number of guys to graduation or the NFL, there's just a lot of unknowns, especially when you've signed, 3 or 4 transfer portal guys. I've made a list here because there's so many new players. I haven't memorized everybody's name yet, but, James Jonkum, defensive end / edge. He's brings a bigger body in there, and I'm interested to see how they use him. Ben Bell, I think, was one of their top portal prospects. That they kind of kept his recruitment quiet, but he was always a high priority for them back in December. Another edge guy. Missed most of the spring with an injury, but they're very high on him. Arius Nash, kind of an undersized defensive tackle. How's he going to be used? Elijah Fall just committed last weekend, I believe. He's another defensive tackle. Cody Heisman, yes, his last name is Heisman, even though it's not spelled that way. I think he's a good player. He represents kind of a bigger framed guy at defensive tackle. I think they were looking to add a little more size to that position, and he can add that. He was an excellent run stopper. How that translates to the FBS level, we'll see, but I'm inclined to think he'll do pretty well. And then, there are a couple of other guys in there. Kamari Copeland's is going to start, and he was a highly touted JUCO prospect, but he had an injury last year, and we only saw him for maybe the first month of the season, so we're still learning about him to a certain extent, and I've always been high on him at Laws. I mean, he was my #1 recruit last year. He got in there really for the first time in the bowl game and did very well, so he's another guy I've got my eye on, and I realize that's a lot of players, but it's a lot of new faces this year on the defensive line. I'm inclined to think the defensive line will be good this year. I don't know if they'll have anybody as good as APR. I don't know if they'll have anybody as good as any as Peoples, but I think it's going to be a solid group across the board.
Do you think Cephas coming in kind of knows, like, he doesn't have a lot of returners, so he gears the defense to that?
Probably. I think he's got an idea of what he wants to do, but he's shown the ability in the past to tweak his scheme based on the personnel that he does have. And it was difficult because, Pry was waiting on one defensive coordinator candidate who did not make his decision until well after the portal closed in January. So when he brought Sam Cephas in, it was like, okay, now Cephas doesn't have a chance to recruit his own players until after the spring. So I think when you look at some of these recent commitments like Fall and Heisman at defensive tackle, I think that's probably Cephas making an evaluation after the spring saying, I'd like a little bit more size, a little bit more frame there. So, it's possible that with these types of players, you could see a 5-man line at some point, or you could see a 4-man line where one of the ends is maybe a little bit more of a traditional defensive tackle. I don't know. I think what we saw in the spring game was very, very generic in just the base formation. It's going to be tweaked week to week based on who they're playing.
All right, well, our next question comes from Hokeball16, who asked, do we know how much it costs Tech to get the O-line transfers from West Virginia? I assume hiring Matt Moore helped, but doesn't guarantee his players follow.
I'm pretty sure Remack is the best, is the highest paid offensive lineman on the team for sure. Maybe the second highest paid player on the team overall. I don't know. You hear numbers for specific players, and first of all, unless you get eyes on a contract, you don't know it for a fact. So asking what we're spending on the offensive line is sort of like playing Wheel of Fortune, and it's like a 19-letter phrase, and you've got like 2 of the letters, and then you try to solve the puzzle, right? So there's just not enough information to know exactly how much Tech is spending on the offensive line. I think when it comes to the guys they brought in from West Virginia, like I said, I think Remack is very well compensated. He was the highest grading interior lineman in the Big 12 last year, so he deserves to be well compensated. The 3 younger guys, a couple of them are redshirt freshmen. Another one, their most recent commit, was just been his first semester in college at West Virginia. None of these guys have played it down at the college level yet, so they're probably not making very much. You can offensive linemen are at a premium, of course, but as far as freshmen who haven't played before, they're not making a ton of money. All those moves were just about relationships. Even Remack, yes, he's getting paid very well, but he could have gotten paid very well anywhere. But because he came in as a proven quality offensive lineman that could play tackle or guard. His versatility is extremely important. But it's still, I think it was his relationship with Matt Moore was the main factor in him coming to Virginia Tech. But as far as how you divide the money up by position, that's something that all coaches have to handle. Do I put more money into my offensive line? Do I put more money into my core of wide receivers? I think Virginia Tech they overspent on wide receiver last year. Some of that was because those guys were already in the program, and it's just easier to retain a guy who's already in the program than it is to say, I'm going to go outside the program and get this lineman. But if you were starting a program from scratch, if it were me, at Virginia Tech, it would be a run-based offense designed around a mobile quarterback, and you pay maybe like 2 or 3 receivers good money, probably just 2. And then you dedicate a little bit more to offensive line. And another thing Tech could have done differently last year is maybe a second tailback, somebody who could share the load with Tootin a little bit. Some of that's on a year-to-year basis, but I do think you have to give yourself a soft cap at each position based on the type of offense you want to run.
All right, and our last question comes from Serbian Hokie, who wondered, is Crist officially the sole QB coach? He's listed as co-QB coach, so I wasn't sure if anyone else would share that role.
No, Montgomery's the quarterback's coach, even if it doesn't say it on his profile. He's a longtime quarterback's coach / offensive coordinator / head coach. Crist certainly plays a role, and he was definitely the main quarterback's coach before, even though Bowen had the quarterback's coach title. He was not actually the quarterback's coach. It was Crist's. This time, Crist is the only guy with a quarterback coaching title officially, but Montgomery's the guy there. That's my understanding of it, and that's how I would have it if I were Brent Pry. That's who I would want coaching the quarterbacks. We're not allowed to see a lot of practice, of course, but what I have seen is I've seen Montgomery with the quarterbacks at all times.
Well, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you guys for your suggestions. As always, if you want to be featured on next week's Friday Q&A, drop your questions down below in the comment section. Be sure to check out Chris Coleman's actual article edition of the Friday Q&A on TechSideline.com. For our producer behind the set, Nick Brown, Chris Coleman on set, I'm Robert Bateman, and we'll see you guys next week.